YouTube, what's going on? Welcome to Members Only. Tonight we're going to cover a topic that one of my VIP members requested, an upper echelon member. Don't forget, if you got any requests, join the Patreon or join the membership. Now, tonight we're going to cover two different organizations, the Preacher Crew, based out of New York, and the Philly Black Mafia. Two of the most feared organizations in Black American street history. One ruled Harlem with fear and terror in the 1980s and 90s. The other controlled Philadelphia's underworld in the 1960s and 70s. So powerful. They moved like ghosts in the system. Now today we're diving deep into the ruthless world of Clarence Heatley, aka Preacher and the Preacher Crew versus the Philly Black Mafia. Now we're going to cover the similarities and the differences. So we're going to cover the 5 key factors when it comes to war, when it comes to organization. So first, we have structure and leadership. We're going to start with Preacher Crew. You know, Preacher, he didn't need a huge army. He ran a tight, loyal, extremely dangerous crew. Now, Preacher's leadership was personal. His name alone made hustlers pay street taxes, kidnapping units, extortion squads. It was precision over numbers. Okay, if you look at the Philly Black Mafia, it was a secret society. These dudes were citywide, structured like the Mafia, with influence stretching from the streets onto the mosques. Some members even moved inside the religious circles, which gave them protection and made them hard to touch. Their leadership was layered. If you took out one, another stepped up. Another important factor is the business and hustle. Now, in the Preacher Crew business model, kidnapping was their bread and butter. They extorted drug dealers, they forced ransom payments, and sometimes killed the victims anyway. I mean, they sold drugs here and there, but they wasn't about building drug empires. They just taxed the empire builders. They even had drug lords like Rich Porter paying to stay alive. Philly Black Mafia business model. Straight major players in the heroin and cocaine business, so, that speaks volumes itself. They control number rackets and shook down local businesses. They shook down drug dealers, they shook down, pimps. They use extortion, but on a more organized, almost corporate level. And we talked about this in the Upper Echelon show. So if you missed out, you already know, go to the Patreon. But they had political shields in the community ties that kept them around much longer. Now, let's talk about the style of violence. The Preacher Crew was all about the terror tactics. They would snatch you up, torture you in basements, cut off body parts and kill you just to send a message. Their violence was surgical, focused and deeply personal. They wanted you to know if Preacher touched you, it wasn't random, it was deliberate. The style of violence of the Philly Black Mafia was very ruthless. The Philly Black Mob, they didn't hide their bodies. Broad day hits, mass shootings, no problem. They even murdered women and children if they saw them as obstacles. Their violence was loud, public, and unforgiving. Now, another key factor when it comes to going to war is their influence and reach. Now, the Preacher Crew, their territory mostly Harlem-based, but respected citywide. They control specific corners through fear and reputation. Even high-level drug traffickers paid them to avoid becoming a target. Now, when it comes to the Philly Black Mafia's influence and reach, they just show pure dominance. They ran Philadelphia's underworld like a shadow government. Their ties to the Nation of Islam gave them safe zones and political cover. And we can't forget about the downfalls of these two organizations, because that plays a big part. Now, downfalls, you having death, you having people going to jail, and this is all going on during the war, so that can kill you in a fight. So now when it comes to the downfall, Preacher Crew, when they collapsed, the same fear they created led to their downfall. Their own members flipped, cooperating with the feds. Now, Preacher was eventually hit with the RICO and life in prison. Now, his empire crumbled from the inside. Now, Philly Black Mafia's collapse, law enforcement finally caught up, especially as the murders piled up. They were just being too reckless. Key witnesses began to talk. The network fractured, and by the early 80s, their reign was just over. I mean, you had a couple of key players that were still in the field, but they wasn't as strong. Now, with all that being said, we could use a point system to see which crew dominates what category out of the 5 major factors of war, which are manpower and resources, tactics and warfare style, territorial control, violence, and last but not least, sustainability. Now, we're going to start with manpower and resources. When it comes to the Philly Black Mafia, they was way bigger. They was better funded and more connected. They had dozens of soldiers citywide reach, and financial backing from large-scale drug trafficking. They also had access to steady gun supplies, dirty cops, and political shields. Now you might say, well, the Preacher Crew had John Cuff. Well, yeah, that was just one person. Like Philly Black Mafia had numerous cops in pocket. Now the Preacher Crew, when it comes to their manpower and reach, they were just more smaller unit. They operated like a hit squad, not an army. I mean, you had like the veteran Malik, but that was about it. They operated like a hit squad, not an army. They had money, but their core income was from ransom and extortions. They had a little bit of drug money, but not large-scale drug operations. I mean, you had their ransoms and scores. They was making more than what they was making off of drugs. So the Philly Black Mafia will have the advantage in that category. In a prolonged war, the manpower and resources will overwhelm the smaller Preacher Crew. So we have 1-0 with Philly Black Mafia in the lead. Now the second category will be tactics and the warfare style. Now, this category I will give it to the Preacher Crew. They was masters of kidnapping, ambush, and surgical terror. They specialized in snatching key players, torturing for intel, and eliminating threats quickly. Now, specializing in snatching the key players is very important. You can get to the head. When you cut the head off, the whole organization fall. They got to Bobby Brown. They was getting to the key kingpins in the street. So, they was super good when it came to that. And when it come to going to war with the Philly Black Mafia, they would likely target the Mafia's leadership directly. And that'll give them that advantage. And their psychological warfare game was just so elite. The tactics and warfare style of the Philly Black Mafia, they was heavy-handed enforcers, yes. Public shootings, house invasions, mass killings. Less surgical, more brute force. Effective but less flexible in the urban guerrilla warfare style. So the Preacher Crew would have this advantage. They would dominate this category because if the war was about quick strikes, targeted hits, and psychological pressure, the Preacher Crew would draw first blood and potentially knock out the key players very early. So now we have 1-1. Okay, now the next one is the Territorial Control, which I will give this to the Philly Black Mafia. They controlled entire neighborhoods, police contacts, political shields, and religious affiliations. They could move weapons and bodies across the city without much interference. They operated like an urban militia with deep street route connects. Now the Preacher Crew, yes, they had Harlem on lock, but they lacked wider institutional protection. Now, their terror earned them respect, but they didn't own large territories the way Philly Black Mafia did. So when it comes to this category, we got to give it to the Philly Black Mafia. Now the score is 2-1 with the Philly Black Mafia in the lead. Now when it comes to this category, the Philly Black Mafia does have the advantage because in a draw-out battle, the home field advantage and institutional power will crush the smaller crew's operations. Next category, violence. Now, let's start with the Preacher Crew. Now, we all know their violence was intimate, gruesome, and personal. They would kidnap and brutally torture enemies to send targeted messages, specialized in breaking morale through surgical fear. Now, the Philly Black Mafia is willing to kill anyone, including women and children, to win. Now, we all know what the Preacher Crew did when it came to Donnell, but when it comes to the Philly Black Mafia, man, they had no fear of public massacre. So we're going to give this a tie because both crews were equally capable of extreme violence. The difference is the Preacher Crew would aim to break minds, while the Philly Black Mafia would aim to wipe out entire family lines. So the Philly Black Mafia is still in the lead, and it looks like they're going to win. When it comes to the sustainability of war, the Philly Black Mafia got this. They got the larger army, more financial backing, more community protection, and they can replace soldiers easily. Compared to the Preacher Crew, they had a small unit, and if a few key lieutenants got knocked off or flipped, the structure would collapse quickly, and they couldn't sustain high casualties. So the advantage goes to the Philly Black Mafia. In the long war, the Preacher Crew would eventually run out of soldiers and safe spots. So the winner is the Philly Black Mafia. Now, this is a very logical pick because while the Preacher Crew would probably win the early battles through fear and surgical hits, the Philly Black Mafia's bigger numbers, citywide influence, stronger finances, and long-game political protection would eventually crush them. The Preacher crew were elite street assassins, while the Philly Black Mafia were urban warlords. So that's just my opinion, man. So if you want to hop in the comments and let me know y'all key facts and what y'all think, feel free to get involved. Get the likes up. If you're new, subscribe to the channel, man. We got a lot of content that's similar to this. Check out the playlist. Don't forget, hit the Patreon, show love. You already know, man. Thanks for tuning in to Members Only. I appreciate all the support. Y'all take it easy. I'm out.